Welcome to a new episode of Walking the Talk. My name is Melissa, and today I'm very excited to welcome my new guest, Jaspar Casey, who's Product Marketing Manager at Eggplant. Hello, Jaspar.
Hello, Melissa. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you so much for taking the time for me. I invited you to this podcast because I think you have a very unique perspective on the startup ecosystem, because right now you're working for tech startup number 6 already.
That's right.
And would you maybe like to start off by telling people what do you do at Eggplant?
Yeah, so I joined Eggplant in December, so very recently, and basically I do product marketing for them and content marketing. So basically that involves all the written communication that's coming out of Eggplant about our products, services. It could be stuff like user guides and, materials to get people familiar with it, or it could be more kind of high level stuff about, like Eggplant's views on what we do, which is software test automation.
That sounds very interesting. Is that the same thing that you've done for all of these tech startups, or is it a new role that you're doing right now?
It's kind of a new role. Like I've basically all the tech companies I've worked in, I've been like the words guy. So any kind of writing, starting with like blogging as an intern, and then a couple jobs ago, basically writing my founder's emails for him to investors. So anything that has words on it. And as you get into slightly larger companies, it becomes more demarcated, like the responsibilities. So this is the first job that I have that has like product marketing in the job responsibility. And the way I would just make a distinction between content and product marketing is content marketing is like everything from emails to social to blogs, even like website copy. And then product marketing is more focused on like communicating the value of what we're doing in a way for people who are kind of already familiar with the area, maybe already somewhat familiar with the product or the brand, to get to understand it a bit better.
It sounds like a very abstract task to me, but at the same time, it sounds very important, because especially in these early stages of a startup, you need to get word out there and, communicate even more. I don't know if more than like in a grown-up startup, so to say, but...
Yeah, I think the main challenge is like, this is the biggest company I've worked in, has about 250 people. Actually, that's not true. The company I worked at before was like 1,000, but I wasn't there very long, so we don't talk about that anymore. but the challenge with doing like content marketing and product marketing is that basically every company could be better at communicating about what they do. Because there's always going to be people that you want to sell to that you don't know how to talk to yet. There's always going to be audience out there that you're either unaware that you're unaware of, or that that you're not being able to reach right now, or people that you are trying to speak to but you're just not doing it in an effective enough way. So to me, what I like about it is that there's always room for improvement, and you can measure it in lots of different ways, like how many people are clicking on a button. That's like a very simple one. But to me, it's more interesting on like a high level. Are people understanding what you do to the extent that when they are talking to your salespeople or your business developers, are they coming in with the right questions? Are they using the language that we've kind of chosen for this space? Are they aware of our differentiators, and are they using those terms? Because that's the thing, like a lot of tech products, because tech products are, I don't want to say relatively easy to build, because they're not, but compared to like physical things, they can be. And the defensibility of your startup, of your idea, of your product, it's easy for people to replicate the functionality of something. Like there's hundreds of clones of Uber, right? So the question is, can you effectively differentiate it to people? Can you get the people that you're speaking to understand that what you're doing is different and interesting and uniquely solves their problem in a way that perhaps other solutions don't?
You know what I just realized? I actually messed up the beginning of this podcast, kind of.
Okay.
Because I actually wanted to ask you 5 questions first,
Okay.
5 random questions. And I jumped immediately to the question about what do you do?
Oh, that's okay. I thought you were going to say you forgot to hit the record button, and I was like, that was
God,
good stuff.
Oh God, no,
I don't
that
know
did
if I
not
can do that again.
No worries. We'll just continue. But I'd actually like to still ask you those questions,
Yeah,
because
go ahead.
I think they're fun.
Yeah.
Oh God, I'm kind of all over the place today. So because I actually prepared 5, I don't know if they're if you want to call them rapid fire questions, but
Okay.
they're just 5 fun questions. So question number 1, what do you want to be when you grow up?
It's a great question. I have never been able to answer that, but I can answer that now because I'm actually doing what I think I'm best at and best suited for. So I want to be a product marketing person working for an interesting company. Like that's my goal. And I've realized like the space that I'm in, once you get into it, there's a lot of opportunity. And, like ultimately I think as a kid, I always wanted to be like the right-hand man of the leader, so the president's chief of staff, or, the sage old wise guy in ancient Greece, rather than the person who's actually making the decisions, the person who's supporting it with advice or information. That's in an abstract way, that's what I have always wanted to do. And in a more concrete way, I think product marketing is a really good fit for me because it requires you to understand things on a technical level, but also be able to communicate that with other people. And it everything from like being able to explain what I do to my mum to, being able to write something that like a CTO reads and identifies with and says, oh, I have that problem, I need to fix it, and maybe this company can help me fix that problem.
Question number 2, do you prefer Game of Thrones or Suits?
That's a good question. I'm one of those people that never actually watched Game of Thrones.
What?
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh my god.
My excuse is that I didn't have HBO, but I know there's ways around that. Yeah, I have actually watched quite a bit of Suits. When I was living at home a couple years after uni, it was on all the time, so I watched that a lot. And they have very nice hair in that program. I can't comment on the hair of Game of Thrones.
Wow, okay. I'm kind of flashed. Anyway, question number 3.
I thought you were going to say Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings, and I'd be like, Lord of the Rings every time, but that wasn't the question.
I have to confess, I've never watched Lord of the Rings.
Well, put it this way, it's going to take you a lot less time to catch up on your cultural deficiency than it is for me to catch up on mine. So
then I'm relieved. Question number 3. What was the last thing that you Googled?
That's a good question. It wasn't how to plug in a microphone. How do I check that? I just pressed the down button. Okay, the last thing I Googled was Lighthouse Google, which is a service from Google for like website performance testing. So if you go to web.dev/measure, you can basically plug in any URL and it tells you how it performs against certain benchmarks and like how long it takes various things to load, and it makes like recommendations about performance. And the reason I looked it up is because my girlfriend works for a furniture company, and in online retail, like speed is basically the number one thing for driving revenue and conversion. So I had a feeling the site was slow, and I just plugged the URL into it and I was like, here, send this to your IT people and they can quantify how bad it is.
That's what they're for.
Yeah, I mean,
that's the degree of badness of the problem.
Right, exactly. The first step is admitting you have a problem, and I think sometimes people don't realize there's fairly simple ways to get a proxy for it, at least. So yeah, that's what I Google in my free time. It's quite sad.
Describe yourself in 3 words. Or if that's tricky, how would your friends describe you in 3 words? I don't know if that's easier. But...
Yeah, that's a tough one. This is one that I actually came up with for a friend's wedding. It was like his younger brother was doing a speech and he asked all of his friends to think of 3 words that best describe his brother who was getting married. And I came up with 3 that I thought were really good, and I'm just going to use them for myself in the humblest way possible. The ideal audience, because I love hearing stories. I love talking to people. That's where I get the most enjoyment out of life, is exploring ideas with somebody, having a conversation where you're not really sure where it's going, but it leads somewhere interesting. So yeah, the ideal audience. But yeah, I don't know if that exactly works.
I love it. I don't care if it works, but I love it. So that's nice. And question number 5, if you were a superhero, what would be your superpower?
My superpower would be to be free of physical pain, unless it's like, pain is quite a useful indicator that something's gone wrong. So I wouldn't want to lose the ability to understand that I had like a broken leg, but it would be really cool to not have pain.
That would be.
Because at the ripe old age of 32, my knee is really sore and like I can't really leave the house right now. And
Oh
driving me
no.
mad. So if I could solve that by not feeling things like that, it'd be
Oh, I would love that as well. For me, it's my back. I have back
hmm
problems, so that sucks as well. I feel you.
yeah. I feel it. Yeah.
Nice. Those were my 5 random questions that I actually plan to ask. I'd like to build on top of one of the questions, namely what you want to be when you were a kid, because you said you always wanted to be like the right hand of somebody like the chief of staff of the president. And I think that connects very nicely to, because you're always an early employee in each of these tech startups. I think you told me that in the very first startup that you worked at, you were something like employee number 9. So it was super early. And
Yeah.
that's like the consistent pattern throughout these 6 ventures that you worked with. You're always an early employee.
Mm.
Why do you like to do that? Why do you like to join at that stage of a startup?
Yeah, great question. And it's, I guess in post, it's easier to identify a pattern over the time. I think basically when I left university, my first degree in Scotland, I basically didn't really want to go and work for a big company. I didn't see myself in like a grad scheme. I was interested in getting involved with tech somehow, in a very kind of nebulous concept of it. I think in the first instance, my first startup work where I was the 9th employee at Due Deal in London, that was partly based on serendipity and luck and kind of meeting the founder, right place, right time. We shared an amusing anecdote about both losing our phones on the same evening, and I said, if I go to Kent and grab your phone from the taxi driver's house, will you employ me? And he said yes. So that's how I ended up in the startup world. And like the cool thing about startups in general is like you're working on interesting problems that haven't necessarily been addressed before or haven't been addressed in that way. There's a high likelihood of failure, so you're aware that you're kind of rolling the dice. For me, I'm a fairly risk averse person when it comes to like I don't really like gambling.
Mm-hmm.
I suffered disutility from playing slot machines or something. It's just not fun for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, being a risk taker is an important part of being an entrepreneur. So I think where my strength is, it's in being a very inquisitive person and being, at once, I can be quite taken in by an idea, but then I'm immediately after that, I'm skeptical about it. And I think that balance of being able to internalize concepts that people are telling you, but then also question them and try to find the holes, try to find the counterfactual. I think that's really useful in startups because, the founder doesn't need just another yes man. They need somebody
Mm-hmm.
who's actually going to challenge their views on things. And, the longer you get in your career and the more, the bigger body of work that you have and experience to draw on, I think you can be maybe a bit more confident in your doubts, if that makes sense. Like maybe some things that I didn't understand about my first company, that was just a lack of experience. Whereas now, if I'm talking, I talk to a lot of friends about their startups and try to give them help where I can. If I ask them a question and they can't answer me in a fairly simple way, then it's clear to me that they still have quite a lot of work to do about addressing that particular topic. And I think as a non-founder, you're maybe uniquely positioned to do that because also like the success of the company and the success of the idea is not a reflection upon my self-worth as a person. I think that drive that entrepreneurs have is a lot of it comes from self-belief and wanting to prove people wrong, and I think that's a really powerful motivator, and I think it has to be counterbalanced with somebody asking questions that outsiders are also going to ask, because you don't want the first time you hear about a major hole in your plan, you don't want that to come from the investors that you're pitching to or a customer that you're trying to win over. You want to have already discussed that internally so that you have something to say to it.
I can very much relate to a lot of the things that you just mentioned, especially like starting from the fact that I'm also really risk averse, very, very
Yeah.
risk averse. I can also very much relate to what you mentioned about the connection between a founder and then, if people question you or if things go wrong, it's not just a matter of, failing publicly, but really a connection directly to your own, like how you look at yourself, how you think of yourself and your self-worth, and that you are in a very unique position because you don't have that. Well, you're in a different position that allows you to do things that a founder might either not see or might not be able to do.
Yeah, that's right. I think, and I think over time, like we all do, founders get better at dealing with failure and picking themselves up when things don't go so well.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, the other side of this is that, like, as a non-founder, all of the companies I've been involved in, I've had, you know, zero or very little equity in, and that's it's also a reflection of my level of experience and my my sort of worth on the open market at the time I joined these companies. But like, my advice to people who are looking to join a startup, not as a founder but as an early employee, is obviously whatever, like, equity or share options you have, get that written down as early as possible, because I've definitely, I think, suffered from not being able to formalize those arrangements. But at the same time, you can't rely on, you can't count on the fact that this is going to, strike gold and you're going to own a sliver of that. You should work there because you find it interesting and because you're learning and because you believe in the fact that you're solving an important problem and that, you're going about it in the right way. Yeah. So, yeah, I think getting into startups for the money is foolish, basically, because the probability of success is low, and it might distract you from the kind of more intangible benefits of working in them, which is, being able to discuss important ideas and, being able to have quite a lot of, creativity and freedom in your work, in how you address problems.
I think you have, like, you're the first person who ever, puts this into words like this, because all the other people I've talked to so far, well, maybe they talk about, most startups are going to die, they're going to fail, it's not going to work, but like, there are so many good reasons why it's still worth pursuing this path if you feel like, you don't belong in the corporate environment, maybe. And personally, I also have the impression that, the roles of early employees are really, not just underrepresented, but also undervalued in the startup field. Because in the end, there's only one or maybe, I don't know, two or three founders, but like the majority of people in that field, they are the employees and they can be early employees and have a huge impact. That's massive.
Yeah, and I think there's also, I feel a lot of, like, pride about having been involved with the companies that I have, because the, like, Due Deal, they've gone on and they have, I don't know, 200 people now, and they have an office in they have a conference room named after me in their office, and I
Really?
yeah, one of the one of my, like, old colleagues told me
That
that.
is so cool.
And I went, when I met Damien, the founder, a couple years ago, for a coffee. I said, "Hey, Damien, I heard you have a room named after me. Is it the toilet?" And he's like, "Oh, I should have thought of that." so
Oh
they
my goodness.
so they missed a trick. It's just kind of, I don't know. It's like, not a great analogy, but, like, it's like if you went to school with someone who went on to be, like, a great
Mhm,
actor or musician. Maybe you don't hang out with them anymore. Maybe you don't have anything to do with them. But it's like, it's kind of fun to be like, oh, I knew them when they were 10.
mhm,
That was fun. I don't know. I guess in a more tangible way, or, like, in terms of what you can get out of your career, like, in a startup, you're going to be given more responsibility than you are in larger companies, like, especially early in your career. Like, I would not be able to do the job I'm doing now if I wasn't responsible for all of the content output at Block Data, which is a company I worked
mhm,
at in Amsterdam. Uh, right around the time I was doing interviews last autumn, where I got this job at Eggplant, Block Data had just been acquired by CB Insights, which was awesome for us because, CB Insights was the company that we modeled Block Data after, and so getting acquired by them was kind of the ultimate validation of that part of the mission. Maybe not
mhm,
of the product market fit and the viability of the business, because that remains to be seen. It's a long journey, but, you know having your favorite company basically buy you is awesome, and that happened right at the time I was applying for jobs. So it was an amazing thing to go in and say, and, like, talk about, they're like, oh, tell us about your experience at Block Data. And I'm like, well, I can take them through the whole journey and say, we started it trying to get companies like CB Insights to recognize us, as to model ourselves after them, and
mhm.
then finally getting acquired. So I think, I didn't get rich from working at any of these startups, like, far from it. But, even the ones that were a complete disaster at least make for good stories. And by the way, just
That's
to be
true.
clear, I don't include Block Data or Doodle in the complete disaster category. There are others we can talk about later if you like.
Sure thing, definitely. But you're right. I think this is the perfect way to express that. There's so much, like from a non-financial perspective, there's so many things that can be so incredibly rewarding when you're part of something like that at this early stage, and you leave impact, whether that's a room that's named after you, or you were there and you made it happen.
Yeah, it's true, and I have a lot of really fond memories of all of these experiences. And when I left university, I was 23, and I had like an economics degree, which is, I don't know, for people that don't study economics, that sounds smart, but for me, I was like, I don't even understand how the stock market works, like, you know. So yeah, it's a way to expose yourself to some really interesting people, and it's not to say that you can't learn a lot in bigger companies, because you absolutely can. And I think that my experience in the last year of working at slightly bigger tech companies, where there's they have an established product market fit and a kind of unique sellable value proposition,
Hmm.
that's also useful, because you can kind of see how people operationalize that, and how you can turn like what you can prove is a good, useful product that people get a lot of value out of, and I guess like turn the engine on and try to scale that out to more people, try to streamline the customer acquisition process or whatever. So there's absolutely value in doing those things. I just think that if I had worked at Eggplant in 2011, I wouldn't be very useful.
But that makes sense. I mean, it was a very different time, and since then you've seen other things. So when you now look at something, even a similar project, you would look at it with a very different set of eyes compared to back then.
Absolutely.
You mentioned before, one of the key questions that a startup needs to be able to answer, or the people in the startup better need to answer. Oh my god, is what's your business model? How do you make money? And if they can't explain that in a clear way and an easy way, it's not happening. I think that's one of the key questions where most people actually don't have an answer.
Yeah, it's, I mean, it's the $1 million question. Obviously, in startups, is like, how are you going to make this commercially viable? The thing is, it's like the model is going to evolve as you grow, as you develop, as your product gets better, as your understanding of the market and what precise problems you're solving. And I think it's okay to admit that you don't actually have a good plan for that. But I think with startups, it's important for them to primarily solve an important problem that people are really having. And there's a great book called Obviously Awesome by April Dunford. It's quite a short book. I listened to the audiobook in about 3 hours, and I highly recommend it. Obviously Awesome. April, the author, she says that it's a book about product positioning and
Mm-hmm.
marketing, basically. The key for positioning something is you need to figure out what is the least good alternative to your product. So if you're basically solving a problem that doesn't have a good workaround. If you go to like Product Hunt, you'll see all these amazing apps and sites that people are building and tools that do solve all kinds of problems. But the problem is that if there's a workaround that isn't that inconvenient, people will just keep doing it the way they've always done it. With startups, you may create like something like a CRM, like a customer relationship management software. So like a Salesforce or HubSpot or
Mm-hmm.
something. But the important part is to figure out like who exactly should we be going after with this, because you really don't want to fall into that trap of, hey, anyone could use this, it's benefit for anyone. It's like, well, the thing is, if you're a startup, you don't have enough money to market to everybody. You need to figure out exactly who is going to get the most value out of this, and who has the least appropriate way of working around this problem that you're solving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think the business model aspect of it is, I mean, it's the hardest thing, and I think it's the thing that even like fairly mature companies still haven't fully solved. I mean, it took Amazon what, like a dozen years or so or longer to turn a profit. It was only really when people moved en masse to Amazon Web Services that they actually started making money. So it depends on the appetite of your investors, how much money they're willing to give you, how many losses you can pile up as long as you're, growing your user base or whatever.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think it's I'm not blowing anyone's mind by saying it's important to have a good business model, but I think the key part of it for me is that it's something which needs to be constantly questioned and constantly prodded, and you've got to kick the tires, so to speak, because you've got to be open to things that you may have previously ruled out. Yeah, because depending on how much funding you have and how big your team is and how ambitious you are, you have very limited time to make things work. So experimenting and being open to figuring out different and creative ways to make money out of your product, or at least get people using it, is super important. But there's a lot of really good resources out there for this kind of stuff. So I don't want to wade too far into territory that is much better explained by other people.
Right. But what you said makes perfect sense to me. The only question I'm wondering about is, so you said you need to solve an actual problem. But so, based on your experience, shouldn't a company figure out at that point already whose problem that is before going on and making a product for it?
I would say that there's no correct order. These things are kind of all happening at the same time. It's a chicken and the egg problem. Things always start with the idea, right?
Mm.
Or even some concept of a problem that you've experienced in your professional life that you're trying to solve. It's it's a kind of constant evolution of, uh, okay, I have an idea that solves some problem, so I'm gonna maybe start by interviewing people. I'm gonna talk to people in various sectors and see, yeah, does this idea resonate with them? Maybe I'll build a prototype that I can walk someone through, and they'll say, "Oh, that sounds really cool," or "That would be really useful for me." It's it's really a constant process of, like, because even as your product grows, you may build features that seem really useful, but nobody actually touches. Like, we had in at Block Data, we built like a news feature that we thought was really cool and a game changer in the sense of it was the only like sort of live data feed in the app, and it
Mhm.
would be something that encourages people to come back every single day and have more engagement with the app. The problem is we found that people weren't they were looking at it, but they weren't using it in the way that we'd intended. They weren't clicking on the filters. They weren't using the search function, which to us was where all the value was. So um, we
Mhm.
were. It's partly a UX issue, user experience issue, but it's also maybe we're slightly misunderstanding how important this issue is for people, which is that they can't get news about blockchain companies quick enough.
Mhm.
So yeah, I don't have a neat answer for you, but the thing is, like, the problems that you're solving, the ways that you make money out of them, the way your product or service addresses these things, precise people that it's talking to, and the way that you're talking to them, these are things which should, I think, constantly be refined, and experimented with. And because the place that you end up, if your startup is successful and it's still here in 10 years and you have loads of employees, and you're making a profit, it's not going to look anything like it was when you first came up with the idea. Google started as a search engine and then became an advertising company. I mean, it's still the most popular search engine, but the money all comes from ads. It's important to understand that as a founder, your initial conception of what you are is going to constantly change, and you really have to embrace that and use that to help you find more and more answers, ask more and more questions of yourself, of the market, of your product, of the problem you're solving.